Hey, it's Callum Bose here. A fundamental concept that is useful to understand when you're building a Knack app is how pages work. Specifically, how we create pages in these different layers and what each of these different types of pages can do, like what data we can show. So in this video, we're going to break this down and simplify it into the key concepts. We're going to learn the 3 ways to create pages, the types of pages that you can create, and how this impacts what data you can show on them. And the concepts we're going to go through are useful for a broad range of people who've just started building in Knack or people who have been building for a while. Because if you have a solid understanding of how pages work and a framework to think about it in, it will help you use some more advanced techniques later. So let's start with a tiny bit of theoretical stuff before we jump into some examples to illustrate the concepts. So when you're in the Pages tab in your Knack app, you have the page tree here, and that page tree shows various different layers of pages, and you can expand those out into 1, 2, 3, 4 or more layers of nested pages. Now each of these pages has a different purpose and can show different data, but it's not immediately obvious what that is until you kind of get your head around it a lot. So we're going to go through how these are created and what sort of data they can show shortly. But first, let's just go through kind of like the anatomy of this page tree so we can talk about it more easily. So we're just looking at exactly what we see here. And you can see that the top level page, I'm calling top level page. And everything below that is a child page. So this page here is a child of clients. This page here is a child of view client details. Going the other way, the parent of edit client is view client details, and the parent of view client details is client. Now this is a public page group, so there's no login protection. So that's what a public page group looks like. But sometimes we'll have login protected page groups as well. And in that case, we have this extra page at the top called the login page. Now this login page doesn't really do much apart from show a login if the user isn't logged in. You don't usually put anything else on it. So I'm going to call this the login page. And even though it's nested one layer deep, the first non-login page, I'm going to call a top level page still. So you can see this part here is basically the same as this part here, except there's some different naming. The top level page is still the first non-login page. So the first page showing real data rather than just a login form. And you can still see that there's the parent-child relationship between them as well. So now we're going to go about looking at how the different layers are created and then also how that impacts what data can be shown on each page. So to do this, I've got a little example app built, and this is its data structure here. So we've got clients, and each client has a name. And then we also have invoices, invoice line items, and users or accounts. So invoices have various things like a number created by. They also say, all right, this is an invoice for this client. It was created by this person. And then each invoice has line items. So each line item connects to an invoice, and it has some info like amount and description. So it's just very, very basic kind of setup for invoicing, where you've got invoices with line items belonging to a client created by someone. And we've got some connection fields connecting all those different tables together. So the way that looks in the data is we have a couple of example clients in here. And we have a couple of example users, me and Peter. And then we have some invoices. So this invoice number 1 is for amazing snacks. Invoice 2 is for great food. Invoice 3, amazing snacks. And you can see who they're created by. And then we have line items for each of those invoices. So just some really simple data, but it's going to illustrate how pages work because we can see how the different creation methods impact what data we can show. All right, so how we actually go about creating these pages is the first concept. So So we're going to, by the end of the video, understand this, but we're just going to go through it one part at a time. So when you're first adding a page, you'd probably already know that you use the Add Page button. So that's this one here. So when I add a page, I'm going to select public page to start with. I'm just going to call it example clients. Okay, so now I have an empty page, and this is a top level page. So you can see here, top level page is what we've created. So we've used the Add Page button, and we've created a top level page. Now, what can we show on this page, and how do we kind of figure that out? So a top level page can show all records. For example, all clients or all invoices. Now we can't really see that anywhere. Like there's nowhere that says this page shows all records. This is sort of implied, and it's why it can be a little confusing for people when they're first building. But we can get an idea of what's on the page by looking at where it sits in the page tree, firstly. So if it's a top level page, it's always going to show all records. We can also see how that looks when we try and add a view. So if we add a view, we could add a form. We could say a form to add a new client. Or we could add a view, a grid view to view all client records, or a grid view to see all invoice records. So notice here, what we can do basically is add new records, or we can list existing records. And we're seeing kind of like all the invoices in the whole app. We're not seeing invoices connected to anything. We're just seeing all the invoices or all the line items or all the clients. So we've used the Add Page button. We've created a top level page, and we can show all records on that page. For example, a list of all clients and all invoices. That's pretty straightforward to start with. So let's go ahead and add a list of all clients, and we'll then build out from there. You can see here we've got 2 clients in the database, and we're seeing all 2 of those clients. We're not filtering it down into a subset of that list or anything like that. Okay, so then what happens when we want to have some sort of nested page, like we need a page to edit an invoice or view an invoice details? This doesn't really help us anymore, because adding this just creates a new top level page. We want to be able to add it nested underneath, and we want to be able, Knack to be able to show like info about one invoice or edit one invoice, rather than only being able to add or view a list of all of them. So we're going to delete that. And this is where we start getting into how we create child pages. So to create a child page, instead of using the Add Pages button, we're going to add a link to view or edit something from a data view. So a data view is any view, any part of the page that shows a list or a single record. So a grid, a details, a calendar view, anything that shows an actual record from your database. So that's most types of views, basically. So this here is a grid view showing all clients. So that's an example of a data view, a view that shows some sort of data. So we see here we need a link to view or edit from that data view, and that's going to create our child page. So let's see that in action. We go Add Columns, Action, View Record Details. This is a link to view record details or edit. These are the 2 that we're talking about here when we go link to view edit. So if we now save that, we can see that we have a new child page, and this child page has automatically added one view for us, and that view is displaying a client record. So we're no longer, we weren't able to show one client record on the parent page. If we try and add the same thing here, go details view. In fact, we don't even have a details view available here, so we just can't do it. But on this child page, if we add a view, we can say details. We have different options, more options. And one of those is details, and we can say details about one client. So what's going on here and why is it different? So when you have a child page created from a data view like a grid of clients, the data source of the page in a sort of implied way that isn't really clear in the builder has changed. So the parent page can show all records, for example, a list of all clients, all invoices. The child page has drilled down into a single record. So now we can display a details view of this page's client or one client. And that's what we see here. So we've kind of drilled down from a global kind of data source where we're dealing with all data, narrowed it down into a single record and things connected to that record. And the reason for that is that if you're on here, Knack wouldn't know which client record you're needing to view data about. You need to first click a client so Knack knows, okay, I'm viewing information about a single client and I know which client I'm dealing with. It's Amazing Snacks or it's Great Food Co, whichever client you've clicked on, basically. So this is where the data source and understanding the data source really comes into play. So a top level page uses all records and a child page can often have a data source of this page's record. Now, this also changes what else we can add. So we've already seen that we can add a details view of the page's client, but we can also add a grid, but we don't see all the options that we saw on the parent page. So on the top level page, we could see all clients, all invoices, all invoice line items. But on the child page, view client details, which deals with one client, we see a limited amount of what we can, of all the things in our database. So we don't see all clients. Now what happens if we click invoices? Instead of just showing all invoices, now we're able to show invoices connected to this page's client. Or if we did a grid of invoice line items, we can show invoice line items connected to the invoices that are connected to this page's client. So everything we can add to this page, it relates to one client record rather than kind of everything. So we can see anything connected to the client, we can show on a child page about a client, which is why we can show invoices connected to the client, and we can show invoice line items connected to the invoices that are connected to the client. And that is really key to understand. So a child page has the data source of one record versus the parent page has the data source of all records. And that fundamentally changes what we can put on that page. So summing up so far, to create a top level page, we use the add page button. To create a child page, we have to do something from a view on the parent page. So we've added a link to view details on the parent page. That created this child page, and that child page, its data source is no longer the global data source, but it's the data source of this page's client, and that changes what we can put on it. Now, there's one other way to create a page, and this is still creating a child page like this, but it has a different impact on the data source of the page. And that is if we use a menu view. So if we go back to our top level page and we add a new view and we select menu, let's go link to a new page. And we'll call this page created by menu view. And we save it. So we've basically created a button that leads to this page. And so you can see we've actually had a new child page created. Now the data source of this child page is interesting. So if we go add view, we can see clients, invoices, invoice line items, and accounts. And it looks the same as if we were on the parent page. On the parent page, if we add a view, we see that same list and we click through and it doesn't ask us for like invoices connected to something. It's just a list of all invoices. So the top level page we already know is like this global data source of all records, but not a particular record. And when we add a menu view, a new child page is created, but its data source is the same as its parent. So we've added a menu view, it's created a child page, but you can see that its data source is the same as its immediate parent. So in this case, the immediate parent is the kind of global all records data source. So this new menu view child page is that same. It hasn't drilled down into a particular record. Now the reason that makes sense is Knack, once again on this menu view, doesn't know what record we're dealing with. It doesn't know if we're dealing with one client record or one invoice record because we haven't clicked on one. We haven't told Knack which record we're interested in. So because of that, it keeps the global data source so we can deal with all records. So what would happen if we added a new child page via a menu view to a page with a different data source? So our view client details page, we already know has the data source of one client record. So let's add a menu view to that and see what happens. We're going to go add a menu, link to a new page, new page from menu on view client details page. And we save that. So once again, we've had a new child page created and it is nested. Its parent is the view client details page because we added the menu view here and therefore a new child page was created. So it's nested deeper. So we can see now the view client details page has a child. So on that child page, let's see what we can add. Well, we see the same options as the view client details page. We see invoices connected to this page as client, or we see invoice line items connected to this page as client. So once again, we see that principle in operation where a menu view to create a new child page doesn't change the data source. It's going to have the data source of its immediate parent. So summing up so far, we know we can add a top level page with the add page button. This creates a page where it can show all records. Then we can add child pages either with a link to view or edit a particular record from a grid or a detailed or a calendar view, and it changes the data source to whatever record you've clicked on. You can also add a child page to any page with a menu, and the child page created by that menu will have the same data source as the parent. So those are the kind of big concepts. So let's actually now go and apply this to like an example of how you'd actually use that knowledge to think about needing to build something. So I'm going to pause the video and clear out all our pages, and then we're going to build something briefly from scratch together. Okay, so all our pages are gone, and let's say we're trying to achieve this. So using the same data structure, we need to be able to view a list of all our clients, add a new one, edit an existing one, view invoices for one client, add an invoice for a client, and edit an invoice for a client. Okay, so how will we actually apply this knowledge to achieve these goals? So viewing all clients, well, that's an example of showing all records, so all clients in our database. So clearly that should be a top level page. Adding a new client. So we don't need to know what particular client we're dealing with to add a new client. So we don't need to have drilled down into a client. So we don't need a data source of this page's record. We need the kind of global all records data source. So this could be on the top level page, or it could be a child page from menu view. So let's deal with those two first. Okay, so all clients. Well, clearly we need to add a new page. Let's call it all clients. So we know this has the global all records data source, so I can just add a grid of clients, and that's that one done. Now adding a new client. We have no child pages. Let's see what we can do on this page itself. We'll go a form, clients, insert a new client. Perfect. Okay, so we can view a list of all clients and we can add a new client. Let's go have a look at how that looks in the front end. Okay, so we have a grid of clients and I can say new client and it appears. So that may be fine and that achieves our goals, but let's say I didn't want the add client form to be sitting here. Well, I'm going to delete that. And then I know that I can add a menu view to create a new child page without changing the data source. So I can go menu view, link to a new page. I'll call that add client and I'll save. And then let's say I just want to put that up the top. Now this new child page should still let me do the same thing. I can add a form that adds a new client. And let's go see that in action and make sure it still works. So I refreshed the page and then I can go new client 2. Interface isn't amazing yet because it's not redirecting us back, but it works. We've got a new client. So that is our first 2 requirements kind of addressed. Now here's where we get a little bit trickier. We need to edit one client. So if we try and edit a client, say by adding a new child page, edit client from a menu, we're not going to be able to do it because we haven't identified to Knack which client we're editing. So if I try and add a form to this child page which was created from a menu, all I get the option for is add client. And same if I tried to add a form to this page, if I try and select client, all I get the option is add client. So I need to delete that page and I need to drill down into one client record, which means I need a page with a different data source. I need the page with a data source of this page's record. So how do I do that? I use a link to view edit added to something on the parent page, like a grid view. And that will create my child page with the data source of this page's record. So let's go ahead and do that. On my top level page, I'm going to add column, action, edit record, and save. That creates this new child page. And it's actually already populated it with an edit form for me. But if I was to delete that, I can also add it back. So I go a form to update a record, update client. So because I have created this child page from a data view, a list of all clients, then I can drill down into one client and therefore I get the different data source options. So let's go and check that out in the front end. Okay, so I have a list of all clients. I can click to edit and I can update the name of one. Once again, we don't have an amazing user interface, but we're showing the concepts. All right, so that is our view or add a new client and edit a client taken care of. So how do we do view invoices per client, add invoice for a client? So we're going to use the same principles as before, where we create a child page about one client record, and that enables us to view things related to that client or the client record itself. So let's go ahead and do it. So from our grid of clients, we can once again create a child page, and we know already that that's going to take on the data source of one client record. So let's go view record details this time instead. Okay, so view client details. It's pre-populated with a details view about this page's client, which I'm happy to leave. So these edit and view pages are basically identical except for what they're pre-populated with. They're both a page about one client record. They're called something different, but I can do the same things on both of these pages if I want to. Okay, so I'm trying to show invoices per client. So now I can add a grid of invoices connected to this page's client. That makes sense because the data source is this page's client. Add invoice for a client. Well, we could add a form on this page, add a new record, new invoice connected to this page's client. But I don't want to do that. I want to have it on a separate pop-up page or a separate page and then come back. So as we already know, I can add a menu view that creates a new page, and I'll call it add invoice for client. And because it's a new page created from a menu view, the data source will be the same as the parent page, which is about one client. So I can do the exact same on this child page. I can go add a form that creates a new invoice connected to this page's client. Finally, the edit. Well, what needs to happen with our edit? We're going to edit a particular invoice. So we can't edit an invoice on this page right now. We're trying to do a form. We can add a new invoice, or we can update a client. And that's because this page's data source is one client record. So instead, we need to drill down into a particular invoice record, and then Knack knows which invoice we're trying to edit. So the data source of this page is one record, and it's one client record. We need to make a page with a data source of one invoice record, so we can edit that particular invoice record. So we are going to add to this grid of invoices, actions, edit record. And now we have a new child page here, and its data source is invoice records. And it's pre-populated with an edit invoice form, but I could have just as easily gone and added a form. Could have added a new invoice with some various options, so we get different options. Or I could have done a form to update any of these things. So I could have done the client connected to this page's invoice, but what I actually wanted was this page's invoice. So that's a little bit of a new concept where we're having even more layers of nesting. We have a page with about all records. This page is about all records as well. This page, which is created from a grid view, is about one client. So is this one. And then on this page, we added some other things that made more child pages. So we added an edit link that made a page with data source of one invoice record, enabling us to edit an invoice. But we also added a page with the same data source, so we can add an invoice for this client, and then that's what we do with the menu view. So it doesn't really matter about the nesting. It's just whatever the immediate parent that created it determines the data source. So the immediate parent of add invoice is a menu view on a page about one client. So therefore it has the data source of one client. The immediate parent of this edit invoice page is a link in a grid of invoices. And so it changes the data source to being about one invoice. Okay, so we can have a real quick look at that in the front end. We can view details about a client. We can add an invoice. We shouldn't actually have that here. So in our add invoice page, we can actually remove the client dropdown. So refresh and try again. So we've gone view client details, gone add invoice, say I created it, go back to the view client, and we have that new invoice attributed to this client. And then we can edit an invoice, submit that, and our changes are reflected as well. So we've managed to use our kind of new knowledge of the data source of pages to enable us to do all sorts of interesting things in our Knack app. So one final thing that we haven't covered is this bottom bit, where what if you have a login page? So this one's pretty quick and easy. So when a page is login protected, we have this extra page at the top called a login page, and this wraps everything else that was there. Now that doesn't actually change the core functionality of those pages. So a top level page still is all about all records, and then child pages are either about whatever its immediate parent is or whatever the record we've drilled down into. This login page just enables us to login protect that page, and it also gives access to additional things on that page. We can access information about the logged in user at any level that we're on. So regardless of it, if it's here or nested deeply, if it's wrapped by a login page, you can access information about the logged in user. So we can demonstrate that really quick. So we already understand the data source of all this group of pages that we built. All we have to do here is we could either rebuild that, adding a new page as login protected, and then build out what we just did. So the top level still has access to all clients, for example, and then you can just do the rest that we did already. Or we can actually convert this to a login protected page. And this is the wrapper login page. I still call this the top level page, and all these child pages with the exact same relationships. So you can see all our functionality still works as expected, but now that we're on a login protected page, we get access to a couple of extra things. So now we're on a top level page, which ordinarily just let us list grids of clients and invoices. But now we get a few extra options in here. We have a details view. We can say details about the logged in account. And that also opens up other options about if anything is connected to the logged in user. But in short, a login page wraps the rest of the pages, but doesn't really change what they do, apart from adding the ability to show information about the logged in user or information about things that are connected to the logged in user. For example, invoices connected to the logged in user. So we could also show that invoices. You could either show all invoices or invoices connected to the logged in user. So that's a lot, but hopefully it's helpful. So very quick summary. Normal pages is the most of what you need to know, and top level pages show all records, child pages show one record or whatever the parent is. And then login pages is this extra tack on thing that can wrap other pages, and it just provides extra options for what you can do, as well as login protecting it.